fleshy race. Humans are fast-breeding and intensely territorial. Their strength lies in their numbers, their war machines, and their formations. Disrupt them, and they will crumble like sculptures in the sand. As predicted, these fleshy creations were no match for undying metal. We are rounding up the survivors and civilians in their ruined cities and homes. They will make acceptable slaves. Yet another human group, but one that seems to be striving for perfection in metal. Your cryptech assures you that this isn't in tribute or in parody of your form, but that these humans are instead afflicted by a madness, much like the Flayers or Destroyers perhaps, that drives them to excise more and more of their living flesh in favor of undying metal. The mechanism-infested humans seem less unusual separated this way. On this side, they're human parts, burned, flayed, ghost. On that side, they're mechanisms, some still active even with the death of the organic host. We can learn little from their failures, and less from their mediocre technologies. What little distance the galaxy has come since we ruled it. Another set of the weak, fleshy human creatures. Though uniquely, they are formed only of half the species, selected by a single chemical twist. They are not modified, nor filled with the power of the warp, nor large in number, but they seem trained and equipped well. Beware, like the green-skinned creations, the belief of these creatures can affect the physical universe. Inside their armor, these creatures were almost identical to the lesser ones, beyond the inevitable sexual dimorphism. The cryptechs are keen to dissect them, to ascertain perhaps why they were separated off into a separate battle formation and organization. We have plenty of bodies and captives, so we should proceed. Whilst notionally the same race as the weak Astra Militarum, these beings have heavily modified and trained themselves to the extent that they should be treated as a separate and much more dangerous faction. For a youthful race, these elite humans certainly have sophistication and power about them. Or rather, had. Perhaps a more in-depth examination of their ruined fortress monastery or vivisection of our captives will give us better insights into their capabilities and weaknesses. These are the same race as the other two human factions we've encountered, but somehow saturated with the war. Our cryptech reports that it must have spread since the old ones meddled with it. Repugnant beasts. We must destroy them as a priority. The warp-infested humans are no longer a threat. Curiously, the larger combatants we defeated were not human at all. They seemed to be part flesh, part machine, and part warp entity. Given our interest in recombining metal bodies with warp-based energies, we should investigate their remains to see if we can make any progress. We recognize these. They were a new creation of the old ones, shortly before our internment. They are more saturated with the immaterium than when we encountered them before, and their technology has degenerated slightly. They should pose no threat. The Old One's creations are as weak as ever, where they themselves are impossibly strong. That said, we should seal off all webway gates we can find, to ensure there is no chance of having to face them again. A rival Necron dynasty has somehow established itself on the planet during your eon-long slumber. They return your heralds in pieces and ignore your demands. They must be defeated to prove your ownership of this, your crown world. A rival dynasty on our crown world. Of course we repudiated, fought, and destroyed them. But we pity them too, for the thousands of years they slept, only to wake here and die at our hand. Perhaps it is easier to pity them, now that they are all dead. The cryptics tell you that these are members of a race created solely for war. Whilst their equipment is technologically crude, their numbers, sheer physical power, and psychic drive means they shouldn't be underestimated as a foe. When dealing with a rabble, especially a primitive warrior rabble, the key thing is to outthink them and dissect their formation slowly. Would that there were any left for the cryptics to experiment on. What are these things? The cryptics' records are silent on them. They must have been discovered long after your hibernation began. They seem to move with an uncanny coordination for apparent beasts. Perhaps we can find out more through dissection. We have eliminated the hegemonizing swarm organisms. Picking apart the remains of these beasts, they are obviously not from the local system, or perhaps even this galaxy. They are monstrously strong though. Would that they were pliable enough to be trained and kept as slaves. What are these? A new Old One creation? They are truly profligate in their creation. What horrifying twist has their flesh crafting given to this undersized species? Beyond metallic suits to mock our form. Gazing at these fleshy creatures' skulls, their bone structure stripped of flesh, a distant memory stirs in the back of your consciousness, of your own Necron tier bodies, aeons gone. You were frail like this. Frail, weak, and shamefully mortal. Curious. You waited millennia to test yourselves against the Old One's progeny, and failed. Your armies are destroyed, the raised extrusions of your cities obliterated. Now the survivors are retreating to their impregnable tombs, whilst the Canoptech automata seal the way behind them. Elsewhere, beneath the planet's surface, tens of thousands of your kind still sleep. Perhaps in a few millennia more, you will wake together. Then, finally then, the galaxy will be yours. You will always remember with pleasure the howls of the Deceiver Shard, as the Silent King's hidden weapon worked alongside the Old One technology to dissect him alive. Now the Deceiver lives on throughout your crown world, as shards bound screaming into your Tesseract labyrinths, powering the engines of your creation. This new weapon made the reconquest of your world trivial. The rest of the Old One's spawned races surrendered or died with their cities when it was deployed against them. These slaves now mine the planet for its rich artifacts. However, the warp storm still looms overhead. You wonder what lies beyond it. A Catan-consumed void, a resurgent Old One empire, or something stranger. Perhaps one day soon, you will stumble across the artifact that clears the turmoil from the sky, and you will emerge and challenge the galaxy's rulers once more. If they still exist at all. After untold millennia, you have finally reclaimed your world from the Old One's scions. Now, nothing walks on the surface of Gladius Prime that isn't a Necron or a slave. You can start the long task of uncovering the remaining tomb complexes and scouring the surface of the enemy's ramshackle structures. Who knows what waits outside the warp storm? The Old Ones? The Catan? With time, you're sure the psychic maelstrom will subside, and you will find out. When it does, you will be prepared, your armies replenished and rebuilt. But you're in no rush. You've already waited eons after all. For your final